I'm fascinated with growth, and as you can see on this non-existing graph, growth is a very recent thing. For most of our history, growth has not existed. In the last 250 years, we've grown a lot. Now, growth hasn't been equal or even, it happens in clusters. And how does growth happen? What is it based on? It's based on productivity, getting faster at what we do, and innovation, finding new ways of doing our things and finding new things to do that people want to buy. Right? And we become more productive in clusters. When we came back from the pandemic, we walked back into these buildings, we looked over each other's shoulders, we tried to impress each other. We're social animals, so we become productive in groups. That's why real estate prices are so high in a place like Silicon Valley. Even though they're doing all the digital technology, they want to be near each other. When we're near each other, we learn from each other. Right? Somebody's doing something good, we pick that up and we do that. How do we know whether or not we are productive and innovative? Well, the litmus test for that is whether or not there's people out there in the world who want to buy what we do, what we make. Right? So exporting to global markets is the thing that leads to fast growth. Right? Over our 250-year history of growth, if you export what we make in cities, you become rich. I guess if you export anything, you become rich. But if you export what you pull out of the ground, say in Turkana or off the coast of Lamu, or even rake off the farms in Kericho or Nyeri, you have growth, but that growth is not sustainable in the sense that it can't sustain shocks. Oh, there we go. Sorry? You will. You, okay. So move past the chart, the hockey stick chart. That's it. You've seen a chart like that. And then we go to the next one, and then I can hang on to my words on the slides. So yeah, right. So exporting to global markets. If you export products from rural areas or what you pull out of the ground, that leads what we call in the literature consumption cities. People move to the cities to consume the rents we produce out on the land. And we don't really sustain shocks because it's not based on our knowledge. It's not based on what we've created. Whereas when we produce something in cities, and historically this happened, it started in Manchester when we started with steam engines, with mass production. It spread to mainland Europe and the offshoots. Then later to East Asia with the 4 tiger states and the big dragon, Shenzhen being the factory of the world. And then with the information age, we had another thing that we could export from cities, which is the Bangalore model, which is this. Right? We can export services from cities. We've seen this 250-year curve of rapid growth. This is not normal. Our lifespans are so short that we think it might be normal because we don't have anything to compare it to. But this is really weird, the time that we live in. There's a statistic from Angus Deaton that, and this, if you haven't heard it, this will blow your mind. 100 years ago, the richest place on Earth was poorer than today's poorest place on Earth by any of these metrics. You can swap GDP per capita, access to health, drop in child mortality, right? So growth is highly unequal and it grows in clusters, but the spread is tremendous. So if we're looking at world regions that have focused on one of these two, manufacturing exports versus services exports, look at the 3 most important companies in the world, at least in my echo chamber, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Google. Who leads those companies, right? It's Satya Nadella, who was born in India, Sundar Pichai, who was born in India. I think there's a strong relationship with India's bet over the last 40 years on services exports on this software sector, right? And of course, NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, who was born in Taiwan, right? But he grew up in the States. But those 2 Indian CEOs, and they're not alone. I mean, Silicon Valley is full of corner offices with top-level Indians, and I think there's a direct correlation. So I can't wait to see who comes through this building in the next 40 years. So quickly, what is generative AI doing to us, to our productivity, to our innovation? What do we know, right? So We'll go back, yeah? Sorry, I'm slow. Let's see what happened with the steam engine. In the early 1800s, we had artisans who were highly skilled, who learned from their masters. These were older men who had a lot of skills. They were at the top of the skills pyramid, and they could build clocks, or muskets, or shoes, or wheels, right? They would build these things one at a time, and these were fantastic products, but you couldn't swap out the parts because they were just meant for one piece. These were the people who were also called the Luddites, the people who were really scared of mass production, and they were right to be scared because they got replaced by women and, unfortunately, children in mass production factories when the steam engine came in, right? So I have here 20% productivity gain. Individually, these women working in these factories were less skilled than these older artisans, but collectively, they just blew them out of the water. They were just so much better, right? They could make so many better, more guns and clocks and shoes, whatever factory they were in. So the technology had a democratizing effect on the labor force, right? The buying power got spread into the labor force further, right? Electricity, at the end of the 1800s, then we swapped out these big steam engines for electrical motors, and that led to a 30% productivity gain initially. Later, it became more. And the gain wasn't just that the engine was better, it was that we learned how to work with that new engine, with that new technology, right? And there's a parallel to today, right? We need to learn how to work with that new technology. So one anecdote that many of you probably know is that it took us quite some time to understand that we didn't need one big electrical motor in the middle of a factory. That's the way we needed it with steam engines. We could have many smaller electrical motors along conveyor belts, and that led to a lot of productivity increases, right? Fast forward to the computer and the internet. There's a famous quote by an economist, I don't know who, but it just goes around, that we see computers, the internet, and the cell phone, we see it everywhere but in the productivity statistics. For some reason, there's a big debate over why we're not measuring it, but we're not getting more productive in the digital era. Maybe we're watching more Netflix, working less, I'm not sure, maybe we're not measuring it right. But what the computer and the internet over the last 30, 40 years of this digital era has done to the labor force, it de-democratized. So there was a skill bias. So there was never a better time to have a master's degree in a STEM field. Because if you were already very productive at the top of the food chain, like back then the artisans, right? You would multiply your incomes. Whereas the rest of the labor force kind of got wiped out or offshored, which is good for this sector. So we had this lovely jobs at the top and lousy jobs at the bottom, right? And that's what the computer did. So now I'm starting my talk. We're at generative AI. What is it doing? How can we know? How can we know what it does, right? So there's two types of studies out there. I'll start with the bad type. And you're not reading them, otherwise you wouldn't have built this building. There's a type of study out there that serious researchers do. I call them crystal ball gazing studies. They look at roughly what a new technology does, what are these tasks it does, and then they look at who does those jobs or those tasks in the labor force, and then they slap them together and they put some statistic on 47% of jobs, American jobs, are at risk. And these are serious researchers, so in the fine print, they put, well, this is actually not how it's going to happen. It's not going to get automated away. We adopt and adapt. But they have a Faustian bargain with the media, because the media never prints the fine print, and it goes out there, we're going to lose all the jobs. When it bleeds, it leads, right? We're going to lose all the jobs, and then it gets reported on CNN and Fox News, and then whoever wrote that study gets tenure because it has a real-world impact. Even though they know it's not good research, it's not good science. So what is good science? If we want to see clearly through the fog, the only thing we should be looking at is randomized controlled trials, right? And please challenge me on that after, not right now. Randomized controlled trials is A/B testing. You control the environment, that's the scientific method. You split a group of mice into two groups, give the one a placebo, the other one the new medicine, and see if it gets approved, because you kept everything else constant. So that's hard to do in the social sciences. So we don't have that many. We have 7 studies altogether. I know it's late, second day of the conference. I'm going to run through the reports of, these are 5, should be 5. 2 of them aren't useful because one of them was on law students. So the theme is, what is generative AI doing to workers? You'll see each of them, and I'll share my slides. What does generative AI do to workers when you give it to them, right? I'm not talking about training LLMs here, like as a job. I'm talking about using it as a general purpose technology, right? They did a study on law students. They just copy-pasted, so that study wasn't really helpful. They did a study on radiologists. They didn't listen to it, even when it was right, so that study wasn't really helpful. So there are 5 studies left that we have on 5 different areas. One of them is a recent study that came out of Kenya. It came out of Berkeley and Harvard, but they conducted it in Kenya. And they did this study with bottom-of-the-pyramid entrepreneurs. So think of kiosk owners, street hawkers, people who made between $340 per month profit and $15 per month profit, which $15 per month profit is like hand to mouth, right? They found that when they gave them a WhatsApp contact, on the other end of it was GPT-4, the people who were to the top of that distribution, the kiosk owners, were actually able to use the interaction with GPT-4 without any training to increase their profits by 15%. The people at the bottom of the skills distribution, or at the luck distribution, I guess, the people who were making $15 a month, actually ended up earning less after they spoke with ChatGPT. So they were asking it questions, they didn't know how to handle it, right? Now, ethically, I hope the researchers reimburse them, because if you're making $15 a month, you can't afford to have researchers come from Harvard and make you 10% less. But for us, the takeaway for this is there's an entry barrier to using generative AI, ChatGPT-4, but it's very low. The next study comes out of MIT, and they took online writers. And God knows we've got a lot of online writers around here. I probably won't have time, but maybe I can afterwards tell you guys about our other research about online writers in this area. We have a lot of statistics on what actually happens in this area with online writers. Anyway, these guys took Upwork writers and asked them to use ChatGPT, half the group, the treatment group, the control group not. And they got 40% faster and 18% better at the writing. And now here comes the first insight into whether or not we have a continuation of the skill bias, meaning what the computer did, best for the best, or if we have something maybe coming back what we saw with the steam engine, a democratization of work. And you'll know from the way I'm saying it, we have the latter. The worst writers, they did entry tests with them, were able to cut the difference in quality in half to the best writers, right? Now, you may ask, did they just copy-paste? Is this actually the writers doing better writing job, or did this was just GPT-4 and we could have just left out the writers altogether? We'll get to that, okay? We'll get the next study. Is that it? Yeah. So Peng et al., same thing as the writers. They did this with coders. So I hear, or there's a study that shows that coders, there's a huge distribution in terms of skills across coders. If you're in the top quintile of coders, you are 27 times better than if you're at the bottom quintile of coders. So there's a big difference between coders. You're not just, one coder isn't the same as another coder, right? So they did this test on these coders, and this study comes out of Microsoft, so they want to sell their product, so we can take that with a grain of salt, but they found that on average, coders got 56% more productive when they used GitHub, which was a precursor to ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, when they used Copilot on GitHub. And the worst coders got 80% stronger, 80% more productive. Now think of the steam engine and electricity, 20%, 30%, right? Off the bat, right in the first days of using this thing, you get 80% better at what you're doing. Next slide. This one comes out of, is a study done in Harvard with BCG consultants, and we're seeing the same picture. So this is at the very top of the food chain. Nowadays, the artisans, right, the people who can make guns are the BCG consultants, the people who are at the top of the food chain. Now here too, the weakest BCG consultants, like Nick, I'm sorry, I had to get that in. Gained 43% in productivity on standard consultancy tests. And I want to be serious. By weakest, I mean mostly youngest, right? The most junior. And Nick, you can see by his gray hair, he was probably in the group that only gained 17%, right? So the more senior group. We're in the next study. This study, please take a picture of this if you haven't read it and internalized this study. This study was done in a Filipino BPO. This is the only study, this is the most interesting study if you're not BPO, and of course if you are BPO. So Brynjolfsson et al. Did this study in a Filipino BPO, 5,200 customer service agents. This was a tech support. These were longer chats between 35 to 40-minute chats. And productivity they measured, and this was a real live study. The other ones, they were giving people tasks that were like their work in the study. But this one actually let people loose with GPT-4 as a tutor, as a coach. We know that tutoring is the best way of teaching people. If you have a one-on-one tutor, it's much better than lectures. So that's what happened. On average, everyone did better. The best contact center agents, they saw, when ChatGPT would talk to them, and would show them, okay, here's how I would answer that answer. You can take it or leave it. The best ones didn't often use that because ChatGPT is at the 80th percentile of human capacity, which the best contact centers workers are better than that, right? The oldest ones. So they didn't use it much, so they didn't gain productivity much. But the worst ones, which are the youngest ones, right, the ones just starting, gained in productivity by 34%, 35%. And this did a lot for attrition, right? We have the good attrition and the bad attrition. The good attrition is if people leave after 5 years to move on in their career, and the bad attrition is if they leave after 5 days because they got yelled at too much. If ChatGPT can help you as a tutor be more like a more senior contact center worker, what does this mean for this place, for this building, for this continent with young people, right? Young, hungry people. I find that fascinating, these findings that we're living in the middle of a tectonic shift. This year, we're living in a new revolution. People are asking, is this the fifth industrial revolution? No. There was the agricultural revolution, there was the industrial revolution, and now there's the AI revolution, right? There's a lot of hype out there, but it's also real. So, next slide. Yeah, that's it, actually. What does this mean for this building? I said all that. Oh, this is a downer. I should have built that up better. Can I take 1 minute to talk about this region? What, really, 60 seconds? Yeah. So if you slide ahead to past thank you, I'll thank you again after that. Here, I pulled out this old slide because yesterday a lot of people talked about that there might be a lot of online workers around here, right? This is a slide from 2018, and I kept telling people, so this is Nairobi. Down here we have the BPO strip. Here we have the Silicon Savannah, all the tech companies. And up here, that was our word. My research associates are over there. These are ethnographers who have studied the online work scene here. We have 36,000 online workers along Thika Road. That is all the way from, it's not one cluster, it's stretched out. It's along this highway because the university students live here, right? So Kenyatta University, JQuad is here. But even the ones who go to University of Nairobi, they commute into town from here. They're all here. And I always told people, hey, wouldn't it be cool if a BPO could parachute in the middle of this thing? And now you didn't parachute in, you just built a space shuttle here. And I look forward to seeing you guys go to the moon. So, yeah.